I have learned a bit as it pertains to like older computing now, and it's just like I'm just really barely world building, as I call it, world building. But I want to know, and I'm asking. Of course, it's a 64-bit operating machine, but was the N64 30? I mean, was the N64 in any way 32-bit, and where was it? And I want to know about its various componentry. Was the N64 64-bit, a 64-bit centrally processed computer? Is really what I'm asking. Isn't that funny, right? It's like, yeah, it is so important to define that that's what we're talking about usually. It's central processing that we're asserting is the defining line for bits in a in a computing device, whether it's like a company console brand or a home computer. So, and I love the magic of, I'd say, standardization that companies are able to produce with console standards, by the way. So no, this is not done in any level of antagonization or it really is done from a perspective that I really do just want people to understand just a little bit better the definition of the more arcane components of how these systems work. There we go. And so the great bulk of what we played on N64 was actually really like 32-bit operated software. It's very 32-bit. The 64-bit CPU was not the central processor usually. Let's say console featured a 64-bit NEC VR 4300 central processing unit, a cost-reduced version of the MIPS R4300i. The CPU could perform 64-bit calculations for high-precision graphics tasks, like geometry transformations, and that is the truth. There is a basis to that, but here's the thing. That, quote, 64-bit CPU is not really a CPU. It's a graphics processing accelerator. It is, in fact, a chip that is built as a central processing unit. They are using it for geometry transformations. It is accelerated graphics for graphics processing. And in fact, it was a 32-bit central processor. So the N64 is truly a 32-bit machine. It looked better because it used a 64-bit renderer or a processor for some of its vector renderings and tracing. I don't think the N64 used quadratics at all. Right, I think they were fully polygonal. But to the nature of it, right, I started this before I started the recording. It's like 64-bit was a marketing strategy. But they never really colored us all the way in. I remember all my homies on Screw Attack and the James Rolfe Sphere and everything. Nobody really got in all the way to it, and I can say, alright, it was to probably Nintendo and everybody's, right? The console folks want to not have people know the connections. And so that's fine. Right, I understand their wanting that. I am one of the people who wants some folks to understand the stuff a little bit more directly, right? So to the nature, right, that it's really 32-bit centrally processed computer, the N64, that has a real 64-bit CPU, so it's not wrong, but it's just purposed for graphics rendering. Right? they can market it as a 64-bit computer. But they know that the market has been depending on that, right, what I state. They refer to the magnitude of bits in their console computers to the resolution of the display, or right, of what's going to be produced on their display. So originally that was for bitmaps, and it was very low resolution bitmaps on their 8-bit home computing devices. Then and those were 8-bit centrally processed home computing devices, the NESs and the Sega. I don't know. Was the Master System was most likely. I think it was Master System was the first one that was 8-bit. And so those are 8-bit color computing, centrally processed units that both have graphics acceleration for sprite drawing and scaling. So they have another CPU that's responsible for doing the geometry that was more advanced than what the 8-bit renderer itself, the 8-bit CPU, the brain of it, could do. So you saw what an 8-bit color computing CPU would do when it itself was tasked with both running the logic of the game and producing the graphics for it in Atari 2600 and 5200 and on home computing devices. Game consoles. And so it was very limited, and the resolution was lower than ever, right? And so it was both Sega and Nintendo that come in, and they start standardizing 8-bit color computers with some graphics acceleration for sprite drawing and additional sound cards for like up to like 5 channels of voice. 2 homes for pretty cheap, right? And then they can finish the computer with the cartridges that they sell for it and supply the ROM for it. They can finish the computer in varying different degrees that advance and upgrade the computer where necessary for additional graphics accomplishments and techniques that would need that additional hardware and compute for in those purposes. So you would only really get a computer advancement like that when you play that game and it comes with the game built in. You plug the whole brain right in. So it's more than just the ROM. It's also hardware and upgrades a lot of the time. Essentially, that was 8-bit centrally processed color computing with the graphics acceleration for both Sega Master System and the Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicom in Japan, right? When it is that we head to 16-bit home computing, right? And then we get that upgrade, and there's an obvious resolution increase to the amount of dots for each sprite and the textures in the background, and the amount of colors that can be produced by the system per screen, depending on its frame rate at once. And a few other factors, with like things like frame rate. And that's just dependent on how well it can draw with what is essentially text. Right? That's how the first 8-bit color computers are really used. It just displays text in different colors. It could do that. And so that's what the IBM 8088 chip, right, in the 80s would produce on mostly IBM PS2s, personal system 2s. And so eventually that was redefined, and like those kinds of 8-bit processors were used in game consoles in the home, right? And that's how it was that the NES and the Master System came about. It was produced over the Ataris, because then, right, eventually the Ataris came out first. and those were all based just on the CPU. Didn't really have any accelerators or any other components other than that CPU, and it would have it run everything and the graphics generation frame per frame. Then they would add other processors to it that were responsible for graphics specifically, in addition to that brain CPU. So now the CPU can just run on logic and consider game state, frame per frame, faster, and the graphics can be generated faster with hardware that can be specialized, right? Hardware that can be specialized for sprite generation, right? The pictures and the moving characters on your screen. So when we go from 8-bit to 16-bit for console computing at home, right, for games, that is in fact a central processing upgrade. Now, with the same techniques of using graphics accelerators like they used before in the NES and Master System, the Genesis and the SNES, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or Super Famicom in Japan, would have now utilized a 16-bit central processing unit that can handle and call to a 16-bit data registry. So a lot more considerations and variations of states can be considered in the game at a time. And so a lot more individualized streams of data and calculations can be made in real time. A lot more objects and children on the screen, like jumping around, and more pixels can be moved independently of one another with the additional compute that this offers and enables. The graphics acceleration has advanced also. So those original hardware accelerations with like CPUs, right? Other CPUs specified to draw the sprites have now been advanced, and now they draw sprites in a higher resolution and even faster rate. Can they update them on the screen? And is it specified for this purpose with the 16-bit data registry and central processing that these machines, the Genesis and the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Famicom, are capable of? From this point on, right, 16-bit was primarily there to produce something that was relevant to the 16-bit and 8-bit graphically accelerated computers in the arcades. So that would be things like pole position, which I think is 8-bit, but it could have been 16-bit. I produced, give me 1 second to refer to that. It's 16-bit. Okay, cool. So, yes. 1982. Since 1982 did we have 16-bit central processing units and data registries to call from in arcade games. So, like, around the early 80s. And that was advanced from electromechanical games that the same companies that would later produce these video games would make. Sega, Nintendo, right, Atari, and on. Namco. And so they were already getting a head start in processing, in discrete electronics. And they would do this in their electromagnetic games. So then when these 16-bit rendering machines became available, and they were already kind of doing it with 8-bit a bit, but truly 16-bit is the dawn of the relevancy of the video game in the arcade. That is when they make the switch from electromechanical games, like F1, to pole position on 16-bit centrally processed computers that are very, very expensive, and you buy to have rented in an arcade. So now that, right, several years later, you're in the early 90s, and 16-bit home computing is available. It's still not quite to the level of compute capability, still, even with the graphics acceleration that is provided and the 16-bit central processing that's used on home consoles like the SNES, Super Famicom, right, Genesis. Unless it was the Genesis, the Master. I think I got it right. It's confusing to call it the Genesis. Um, so at that point, right, you see that 16-bit was supposed to mean right, graphics that you'd run into in the arcades and those big cabinets. Not quite. Not quite. Even though it runs on the same kinds of registries and stuff, it just simply does not have the compute potential that those devices have been specialized to use on the commercial end in those arcades. So people are now seeing for the first time that the bits really might not mean what it means in the cases they've run into it in the arcades. It's 427. Um, but they're still going to be very satisfied because the jump from 8-bit central processing and the graphics acceleration for sprite generation that they had then would truly jump so heavily with the compute capabilities that they were able to offer, right, accessibly, with the 16-bit centrally processed units, and then those more advanced graphics accelerators and features with that. So they would be happy with the resolution upgrade. It was a better resolution upgrade. People still saw that, right, the magnitudinal shift from 8-bit to 16-bit was a clear indicative advancement for they. And so for a while, does it hang on 16-bit, right? 32-bit operating is really kind of a thing that begins with the 3DO, right? But it starts before then, obviously. Like, chips are manufactured, 32-bit registries are being developed, these things are being used in like F-16s and whatnot, right? It's all for calculated processes, right? And that can be run in tandem to help adjudicate actuals in reality or physical mundus, right? So let's not go too deep into that one, okay? But calculators, okay. All right. Essentially 32-bit home computing in video games becomes available. Right, I think they already would have been going 32-bit in the arcade, so you would have been seeing games that were like the Jurassic Park shooter with the on like the stock and everything that was inside the little dark room. So those little dark room games. You would have been seeing a little bit of it. They wouldn't have been too high end, right? A lot of them were still bit mapped, but they were like cool. They had feel is, but there's the Star Wars, right? And that's like a vector traced game and everything. For sure, that's off of a 32-bit processor. There's a few, but they're there. They're really not foundational yet. That's not what people really think it's cool, right? But it's like it's still during a time where arcades are filled with both cabinets, pinball machines, and electromechanical games. So it's like it's all just entertainment still to people, right? To a lot of folks, it's not defined. And pinball slaps and electromechanical games slap. I'm like, you guys, CF is so fucking cool. All right, so did a video on that if you want to find it. So to the nature of how it is that we find 16-bit home computing entering in the age of 32-bit home computing with the 3DO, right? And you're going to see games at this point like Doom, on I think 486 operating systems, the earlier ones, and they're gonna run perfectly on 486s, right? These are home computed, centrally processed 486 machines. I don't know if it means its clock speed was 486, or if it runs 486 strings at a time, or 486 processes that are multi-threaded. I that's something I'm still right. That's another level of minutiae and granularity I'll get into. Um, but either way, these machines are capable of running games like Doom and beyond. They can run Myst, right? That's a big one. They can run a lot of different things. They can run things down like Leisure Suit Larry, right? And you run off of like your floppy disks and shit. Um, but these machines kind of now are beginning to found other standards like Quake and Unreal. It's 432. And so these are like very relevantly higher rendering games. It's come out a little bit later, so I don't want to get ahead of myself. But they're very strong machines. They cost thousands of dollars. Most people don't have money for them. That's why. That's the thing. Some people know about 486 rendering or capabilities, and right, and then if you like max that out with a Voodoo card and like any kind of N1 or the Diamond chip, you're gonna be cashing out max and relax and all cool and stuff. But 3DO is a $700 machine that you can purchase in the early 90s. And it is an amazing 32-bit operating full 3D machine. And my favorite game on it is Return Fire. It's so cool. I can't believe that they had that as early as they did at home. It's so cool. What a great game. I've only ever played the port of it on PlayStation, but I'm getting close to beating it. And so it produces a very real, kind of unknown though, break into the console market from Panasonic, an American company's end. And it's very intriguing that they managed it. And it's like, it kind of very quietly reestablishes the American video game industry. And it kind of goes up, and then it gets taken by Sony. If I'm gonna be honest, but it's because the price points. It's our own free market, you know. The price point was high at 700. Like a year later, does Sony come out with the PlayStation, and is it a 32-bit 3D full 3D operating or right full 3D system? That's a 32-bit centrally processed graphics accelerated system that produces graphics higher end even than the 3DO, which could really do like a lot of top-down isometrics in 3D, but it's like it has trouble in a lot of places. So there's a more full variety of 3D that's kind of being marketed, and is it $300 cheaper in early 90s dollars, and so 32-bit 3D processing and operating is first made truly available and accessible to most Americans through the PlayStation. And with a 32-bit data registry, 32 places to run calculations electronically, and potentially multi-thread techniques that they had since 8-bit processing. Right, so they might run up to 64 calculations for a tick, some ticks, and right, there's a lot of different things that can be used. PlayStation is more known for using things like quadratics in some systems. Like, it was good enough for quadratics. It was good for polygons and right trigonomics. Um, it was a very, very great game system, and it was the first one was known. But in truth, $400 for a game system in the early '90s is a lot. So then the N64 drops a little while after, like a year and a half too, with the N64, and this is right. This is the first time, truly, that 64-bit was going to kind of be a little misleading. Um, the jump from 16-bit centrally processed computers like the SNES and Genesis showed from the NES and the Master System, right, was clear. And then the jump from 16-bit home computers like the 16-bit SNES and Super Famicom and the Genesis to the Panasonic 3DO and the Sony PlayStation, right, is clear. Once again, 8-bit to 16-bit was clear and obvious. 16 to 32-bit was like fucking mind-blowing. And so naturally, the N64 is going to be the first time that a 64-bit system is going to be marketed to the market that is not truly 64-bit centrally processed to the whole nature of the system as it pertains to the set of the system as a whole, right? The whole thing is not centrally processed at that 64-bit central processing unit, even though it was a 64-bit chip designed for central processing. It is not being used for central processing in this system. It is being specialized for geometry transformations. The 64-bit system, is really just an upgrade to that sprite generator that we talked about in the 8-bit and 16-bit graphic accelerated sprite generation systems, which allowed for like fast updates of sprites and multiple sprites at a time, but also things like parallax scrolling and super scaling. Right? Actually, I don't know if they didn't call it super scaling, not super scaling, not super scaling. We'll call it parallax scrolling and other things. It may have been called super scaling at the time, just very fast scaling and being able to very, very, like, liquidly shift sprites across the screen at varying degrees of size to give ideas of scale and close and depth and distance too. But yes, that 64-bit CPU that Nintendo's marketing as a 64-bit system is not the actual central processor. So every other game system, like the 8-bit NES and the 16-bit SNES and the 32-bit PlayStation, has been truly marketed as a magnitude number system, right? And people see the obvious resolution and graphics upgrades in this, and the central processing upgrades. And now Nintendo, without making it more obvious that it's not the central processor of the system that they're talking about, right? They're going to make it look like they update to 64-bit central processing, and when they don't. And so everybody's going to think, without knowing how any of this works, right, they're going to be like, oh, okay, 64 bits means better and higher resolution, right? And so this is going to be used as a placebo effect for people to truly perceive the N64's graphics as superior to, say, the PlayStation's, which, with the 64-bit graphics acceleration, it does kind of perform better in some places, for sure. And the transformations do not show gaps and holes like in Legends 1 shows so obviously, right, on a PlayStation system. And so that's kind of, there are tessellation up advancements and stuff, right? But it's not any graphically superior than the other 32-bit systems. It's going to be highly graphically superior to, say, the 3DO in places, because 3DO is still kind of limited a bit. But to the PlayStation, No, it might even be asserted that the PlayStation is still superior in some places. But Nintendo is able to market it truly as something that, I mean, it does have geometry transformations that it can pull off that the PlayStation can't. So it does have a leg to stand on for sure. But this is the beginning of that. This is the end of what is known as the Bit Wars. In the end, right? Because Nintendo kind of fibs. And now everybody doesn't know what it means anymore. Never really knew. They used to know it to mean at least objectively obvious graphical advancement, but now they think a jump from 32-bit to 64-bit is a jump in central processing. It isn't, and they don't see the upgrades, so they don't know what it means anymore. That's what it is. That is the dragon break of personal home computing and gaming and console gaming for the world. I'm calling it out as the dragon break. It's funny. And so I'm syncretizing it. I'm syncretizing it. Historicizing it. It's all good. It's all good. Oh yeah. So, to the nature of it, after the N64 drops, right? Would you have known that let's say we looked into this. Yep. And I already looked this up. It's 120. No, 28. Main CPU core. I don't know why. I have no idea why Gemini answers this way. The CPU core, the main CPU core was a 64. It's a 64-bit operating system. But since it used vector limits that allowed the system to process data in 128-bit instructions, they would state that it was a 128-bit system. So now PlayStation 2 is bullshitting. They're talking about a 128-bit data registry. They're not using 64-bit central. I mean, they're not using 128-bit central processing. So now they're starting to mangle what the meaning of it, based to the continuity of the central processing registry and chip, the final compilation of everything, tick to tick, right? They're starting to mitigate and undermine further even what Nintendo started. It is a 64-bit system, the PlayStation 2. Just like, actually not at all like the N64. The N64 is a 32-bit system. And the PlayStation 2 is a 64-bit system. And thusly, Nintendo's first true 64-bit system to the basis of how we were talking about is likely the GameCube. It's just okay, give me a second. CPU 32, 64-bit architecture is implemented with the 32-bit central processor. So even the GameCube is still 32-bit. The N64 wasn't 32-bit, the N64 was not 64-bit, and the GameCube is not 64-bit. So, now we go again. It's probably not that the Wii is a 64. Is the Wii a 64-bit system? Probably not. No, it's a 32-bit system, just like the other ones. So, is the Wii U a 64-bit system? It has to be. It's a 32-bit system. No, I said Wii U. I said Wii U. I said Wii U. It's still a 32-bit central processing system, centrally processed system. So is the Switch a 64-bit system? Oh, the Switch was Nintendo's first true foray into 64-bit computing in 2016. The the N64 was 32-bit. The GameCube was 32-bit. The Wii was 32-bit. The Wii U was 32-bit. It was the Switch that brought us into 64-bit centrally processed computing. Let me just... Yep. There they are. So, right, you probably run an x64 system on your own rig. Right, or a 64-bit operating system on your rig with x86. And that's a registry reference point. How it runs and what it runs from. So that's just so that you know that it processes all the way back to x86 computing standards from Microsoft Spaces and with Intel and everything. So I'm so happy to ta-da. And so let's see. The PlayStation drops the first 64-bit system because Nintendo seemingly stole the first 64-bit computer away from PlayStation. And everybody thinks that bits don't matter anymore. They crushed the game. They did their end of MK Ultra there. Wow, what a play. What a fucking play. So Sony didn't even bother to market that it was actually a 64-bit system. They were like, it's actually like a fucking 100-and-something-bit system. It's 128-bit. How many fucking bits do you want? Fucking, so they're going on the fucking... going on the fucking graphics renderer. Fine! With a fucking 128-bit registry. Fuck you! Oh my god. And now nobody knows what anything means anymore because people don't know the difference between registries, central processing chips, color palettes, and resolution, and the separation between 2D sprite generation and graphics tessellation and 3D generation and tessellation. Graphics rendering and then 3D tessellation. And so nobody knows at all what the bits for home console computers anymore. And they might have both determined that it worked to their interests than not have people know. It's likely that the PlayStation 5 is a 64-bit system. And computing really hasn't needed much more other than from true 64-bit CPUs. We haven't called for to really any more graphics necessity. Now is the time that we've purposed ourselves so much for graphics tessellation and processing that now we're beginning to make the graphics the bigger brain of capability in the end. But it's not used for central processing. It just needs to be beefier for the graphics demands that we ask of it. So it gets more compute with these beefier graphics cards than, in the end, what the CPU is capable of processing. But it's fine. It's not what it's purposed for. It's purposed for the final tick rate, and tick per tick to the closest end of the hardware computing end of the system as it talks into BASIC, the code from Windows that talks closest to the hardware. What is being calculated, what has been processed tick per tick. And so it gets the assets as produced from the graphics card that's higher and higher quality. But the asset, right, it's really just grabbing it as an asset. Alright, it's like, whatever. It's like a fucking kid's crayon coloring to infinitely intricate mosaic. It's just an object that I'm grabbing to me. And that's what the CPU does from the graphics processor. It either takes low-quality things produced from lower-quality graphics processing unit, or higher quality thing from higher quality graphics processing unit capable of more stuff. And so that's really that. So everything since PlayStation 2 for Sony has been a true 64-bit operating system, and that's why the PlayStation 2 looks very good, but the graphics processing was probably accelerated higher on the Nintendo GameCube, even though it was a 32-bit centrally processed system. So that's how it was that Nintendo competed with the PlayStation in its upgraded central processing systems and registry set. Nintendo produced more graphics acceleration, whereas PlayStation produced overall more base compute. To be multitasked and multi-purposed for multiple different reasons, right? Theirs would have run more like an Atari machine, right? But it was just all being run from an 8-bit. There was definitely graphics acceleration, but it was more compute that could be used for either reason. And you see that this is continued in the PlayStation 3 when they used a central RAM pool for the graphics card and their CPU. And they had a specialized processor for that in the PlayStation 3 as well. Likely a tradition that they continued. Now we use similar standards in systems like the Steam Deck, actually. But that's more based to, like, we use NVIDIA graphics on the Steam Deck, but I think AMD central processing? I don't know. For the central processing, we definitely use NVIDIA graphics on the Steam Deck. And I think they use NVIDIA for the Switch as well. AMD for the central processing, I think, for the Switch. ARM. No. SoC contains ARM. Okay. And NVIDIA. Central processors. As well as their NVIDIA graphics solution. So I bet you it might be NVIDIA that we use central processors for on Steam Deck's end too. So, give me 1 second. This is ultimately like the nature of that's where it gets more interesting. Right, again, the GameCube utilizes a more advanced specified system for graphics acceleration. And they don't upgrade their 32-bit central processing. They say we can operate with enough calculations on that 32-bit system and registry. It's about the Dolphin chip, right? And so you want to like produce they wanted to produce a higher graphics solution. So they already kind of were getting the idea. Because that's exactly how it was that the 64-bit based home computing, right, PC computing and like system would go. It's like 64-bit was going to be the cap. Do you really think you can harness all 64 bits? It's like, no, we knew that when we were producing the N64. They definitely are getting it down with the GameCube. It's a shame that the GameCube. It is a shame that the GameCube doesn't work out as well as I think a lot of people were hoping. It really was an advanced system, but I think it was getting dished on for the fact that it was only 32 to 64 bit and not 128 bit like PlayStation. So now it's like Nintendo's own decision came back to haunt them for the PlayStation 2's drop. Because they were just saying, fuck it, we'll do it on the data registry if you're going to play the game. That you're just going to use another CPU, and it's not really your CPU, it's really your graphics accelerator. So we're just going to do something that's technically a 128-bit registry. And now they won't know the difference. Still a 128-bit system, which is what you said for your N64 when it was a 32-bit system. You knew it. So it did come back and haunt them, and that affected their GameCube sales for sure. The Wii was, again, Nintendo having, most certainly lobbying interest and, marketing ability in that lobby. And I love that shit because that was what enabled really good customer service for me in the past. I don't know if you get it today. But I love them very much. And so, to the nature of it, that was a basis to now see it doesn't matter. We'll still run a fucking They said we'll still run a fucking 32-bit system, and we're gonna fucking plow you. We're gonna plow you with the Wii, and they do, People are like, I still don't fucking know what computers are. I'm gonna start flinging the little Wiimote around. It's like I got my nunchuck. And people make themselves look like idiots with the Wii for a few years, including myself, and it is fun. It is truly the first base into room scale VR tech that we run into now, which is amazing. So it really is the basis to motion controls, and so they start saying interfaces is where we want to play with now. And people do want to play with different interfaces. They like the arcadey nature of how all that might work, right? And that's everybody. It's been marketed excellently. It looks like the future. It's a 32-bit centrally processed system. It's really fucking funny. It's no better graphically than the GameCube. It's an interface system that you're paying, right? Essentially the same system for again. May as well have been an interface 32X for the an interface 32X that you're just buying another Sega Genesis for. And so essentially it's still Nintendo just says they just dab on him. They just fucking dab it on him, and they're like, nah. I don't give a shit. We're still around 32-bit. You can run your 64-bit shit, even though we still technically dropped the world's first 64-bit system. And they're like, The PlayStation 3 does not do as well with the way, because the PlayStation 3 again is an advancement in compute that Sony invests R&D wise and materials and engineering wise into. And so it cost $600 in 2006. The Wii costs like $300 or $400, $350, because it's really just the interface system, and it's like it's a GameCube. It's really got the same kinds of solutions. And so the PlayStation 3 suffers to the way. But what it suffers harder to in terms of higher graphics, compute, and performance is what it is that likely Nintendo's lobby went in on Microsoft's lobby on, right? Microsoft Gaming, Xbox. And so now Xbox had come up, and they were gonna use marketing to plow Sony, and Xbox gets really high picked up rates, right? They get picked up like crazy. What's the problem with Xbox? Why is it all ploy? Why is it very truck economy? But it's not, because they don't actually limit the free market. You have to choose the right choice. Microsoft has the things kind of designed to fail with red rings. So there's now a cash crop intake off of every time you send your console in to get repaired. And so my PlayStation 3, even though it was the 80 gigabyte one, wasn't backwards compatible with PS2. I still had my Slim. I didn't have the same digital connection, so that kind of sucks there. But at the same rate, it's like, it's clearly, that computer still runs, just screams as it gets really hot. But the PlayStation 3 still runs. My Xbox 360 arcade, which amazingly kept going until I needed to showcase gameplay from it here, and I wanted to showcase what Microsoft was good at. Lo and behold, does its optical drive fail? So there you have it. And so now you're starting to see a little bit of truck economization with marketing purposes, getting more exposure for certain home game consoles than others. Let's say, was the Xbox 32? I bet you it's 64. Xbox. I presume it was, because it was like Pentium based. Yep. Pentium 3 processors. So that's what's amazing about them. The original Xbox is a quality machine. It really is. It's built like an Optiplex. And it's a very high-end Optiplex at that, and it's sold for pretty fucking cheap. And so Microsoft in 2005, when it releases its 64-bit system to compete with PlayStation's specialized 64-bit system, that's really they call it 128-bit, whatever the fuck, 112-bit, whatever. Now is it that Xbox and Microsoft are going to make it look like the Xbox is a very high quality machine, and its lifetime shows that they do not fail. They're fine. They really are fine. They're excellent, and they're high end Optiplex boxes that are locked down for gaming and music. Um, and so they feature 64-bit, that x86, right, processor, right? The industry standard to console computing. So that's how they bust in, right? And people are sold with truthful quality. Then the Xbox 360 is there, and it's designed to fail. And they used that, and they used the quality of what they were able to accomplish with the true value of the Xbox system. Now with very true technical advancements and graphical advancements that are available in the Xbox 360, designed to fail via certain mechanisms, and then it all just comes to people magically as a red ring of death. Got to send it in and pay money, and wait and deal with it. So essentially, at that point, is it that, my PlayStation 3 really rang out as awesome, but at the time my Xbox 360 arcade ran fine the whole fucking time. I was using it, so they both looked decent enough. I just heard of all the other issues, and ironically, the arcades did not have the lower quality problems of the more expensive 360 units. Right, the arcade was like a higher quality machine that was not designed to fail for some reason, and even though it was the cheapest one. It's so fucking funny. So I made a slam dunk of a decision because I was able to play Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect, and I was able to play Fable 2. That was the real fucking good reason that I bought the 360, and it was a great reason to buy a 360, period, end of story. So the 360s generally are made to fail. The PS3s do well, but with the marketing that Nintendo and Microsoft both are able to run, they run a blue ocean system between them. They say, Nintendo, you get the kids and the families that aren't really into console gaming yet, and you can draw them in for our whole ecosystem, and then you'll get the most amount of people with your way, and then we'll get the more hardcore gamers over here, and we'll funnel them all up away from Sony, who's not really in our thing, right? We're both lobbies here in America. They're like, cool. So that's exactly what happens. Thusly, a lot of Americans are failed with systems that are designed to fail. Slight truck economization there. Go figure, it's Microsoft. Essentially, at that point, do the PlayStation 4 systems drop? Microsoft kind of, because they're just not even going for it. It was the game industry for Microsoft is kind of a ploy in the first place. They're laying off folks like Lionhead and like a lot of their great studios. Rare is closed for a bit, and a lot of amazing studios are closed. Microsoft goes in, buys stuff, and closes it down. That's what it does. Bought Blizzard, ruin Overwatch, remarket the same games with slight HD reskins. They'll probably be using AI to synthesize new higher quality textures and selling it for $60 in a few years. But hey, Xbox Cloud Gaming sure is a fucking awesome service. Truly. And Grounded is a fucking fabulous game. It's like one of the best survival games I've ever played in my entire life. What imagination. I would state that still Microsoft really is like losing its grip, and it doesn't really care. It's losing its grip on the game's software and the industry in terms of quality, and it knows so now. At the time of the PS4 and right in the Wii U and the Xbox One, the Xbox fails even though it's a 64-bit system, and it fails to both the Wii U right? It fails to both the PlayStation 4, which is an even higher, right, compute level system for PlayStation, now offers things like God ray effects and a little bit of ray tracing, really high end ambient occlusion that looks a lot like ray tracing. Um, Clarity, not a lot of fog, not a lot of culling, and right, really 1080p gaming, but right. And so it's a clear winner for the advancement. I don't really use my PlayStation 4 much. We're slapping it up on the Wii U. The Wii U is actually really great. To learn it's 32-bit operated is fucking amazing to me. I'm just like, hot damn. So they must have advanced their Dolphin style chip and their graphics acceleration even more heavily, and truly it produces amazing tessellation in 720p. It was excellent HD. I loved it. They did excellent things with the Wii U. I was so sad to see how short it ran. It was a great computer. Um and it still runs today. I loved the controller's fucking awesome. I loved it. Man, I played so much more Wii U than my PlayStation 4. So it's like I come back for you, Nintendo. I always come back for you. I always come back for you. I thought that it didn't get enough credit, even right as it is 32-bit. I just think it's funny the 64-bit. Fucking got him. Got him. I love popping into the veil, man. I love popping into the veil. So fucking handy. So I figured record it. It's like, yeah, you're about to teach yourself about central process computers and stuff. It's like you're about to define the basis of central processing in home consoles. It's like, yes, I am. Yes, I am. All right. So I would state that PlayStation really holds the console market tight, and they care a lot about, right? Sony cares a lot about software. They want quality software. They're still giving a shit about quality software. They have better exclusives. They still bother to maintain an exclusive market, and now Sony begins pushing its content that's just exclusive for a while to PCs so they can make money there, and their license holders who produce those games, right, exclusively for them first, can make even more money. So they're not closing off the ecosystem to themselves. They're just giving themselves, like, right, you're paying for, like, a high-end system that can play their software at the highest level of graphics capability, but it's only their games. So it's, like, really the closest to, say, Sony in terms of, like, the lockdown stuff. Sony is, like, the closest to the folks that would still, it's, like, in a way, it's, like, software key access to graphical compute. So it's a lot like the cartridges you'd plug into your system, and the most, I would say it's the closest to that. In a way, it's really weird. Um, but PlayStation 5 is like those are like dense graphically capable computers, like very 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 high end, for very cheap for what they are. But since they're so locked down, they can't be used for personal computing. They get so they're specialized to use those married GPU, CPU, RAM pools, right? And it's a whole fucking dense ass brick of that, with the acceleration that it has for graphical compute and graphical processing. So that's what the PlayStation 5 offers. The Switch offered a small form factor 64-bit based operating system that was, right, gonna be more it's gonna be more graphically capable than any previous Nintendo system. So people were going to see the obvious upgrade if they only ever did Nintendo, and like they're still happy to see an upgrade, but it's like it is kind of dinky in comparison to what PlayStation 4 is. And then it becomes dinky to the Steam Deck, but now they have the Switch 2, and that's a very excellent response to it. Um, and so they're handling it still with small form factor, and this time incredible punch in small form factor for the Switch 2. Still going to be a 64-bit based operating system, really nothing higher than actual 64-bit actual central processing units used for central processing, actually central processing. Um, but the graphics acceleration is going to be tight. And they're going to use software techniques with it to make it as tight as possible with the actual amount of compute they have. But it's going to be very, very, very high-end, efficient tessellation techniques and methods married between software and hardware. And so that is why the Switch 2 can be cheap to you. And still very viable for them. Because it's going to be a system for them to use for... they're going to be on it for like well over a decade. Like, get in now. And so I would also assert that to the nature of that and it being like a 64-bit based system, right? Still, then you have to compete with the absolutely overhauled graphical compute that isn't going to be software based quite as much that Sony has to offer with that, right? They also care about games and quality. Xbox is like falling the fuck off. They've fallen off. Microsoft has fallen off the wagon. So once again, American gaming kind of... It didn't fizzle because of Valve, right? So we have American gaming still in Valve, and it's a private company that's left in, so it's really cool. So, back Valve, back Valve, back Valve, always back Valve. They always do the right thing, usually. So, watch them too. That Steam Deck is a 64-bit centrally processed unit with the NVIDIA graphics acceleration of an actual graphics card that's also centrally married to the central processor RAM pool. I think 16 gigabytes of it. DDR6 style. Could be DDR5X, I don't know. I think it's DDR6X. But either way, it's very fast. It's RAM that can be used as both VRAM and SRAM. That's the whole idea. So both for instructional set programming, right? Host the instructions to run the signals through that run it more specifically to a software that you need it for, and it can host the actual. It has the pipelines for specificity for tessellation performance as well. The RAM can handle both very well. And the processor that it uses is best designed for that. So it's going to be very similar over on the Switch as well. It's going to be very centrally married. That's where it kind of is going to differ, but they're gonna have higher graphics processing capabilities. That's when they would have moved away from how it was that the graphics processing would have been truly separated from the central processing, like in the Wii U. Right, it would have been more. Now they married to, but to the standards of 64-bit x86 processing. That's the idea. So Nintendo has shifted into the status quo, right where we want them in terms of standards. Sony's going to be a little bit more off. Nintendo and Valve both are going to have 64-bit x86 based processing as its central processing for its systems, right? Sony's going to have a different type of CPU graphics solution that's not to that same standard. They want to stay very separate and from a different registry style system and everything. And you'll probably see that Apple, right, would run some similar kinds of bases really for its home computers, like its Macs. Apple will run similarly for home PC computers. So they're that Apple would take and try and do what Sony does to try and disintegrate from the system. And now Apple's taken that kind of behavior and pushes that more and more into the ecosystem, right? And away from hardware, so things do not compute to these standards. People have to produce Apple software for Apple products. They like that. They were going more for an Intellian standard back in the day, like 10 or so, 15 or so years ago, but then they kind of dropped away from that. Not great. And you can rest assured that they do that similarly for their phones as well. Well, a lot of companies put a lot of money to try and integrate between devices as much as possible for the viability of their own products. So that sure is good, and I hate it when Microsoft and Apple do things to try and fight really just the consumer's ability to integrate themselves and buy what they want. I fucking hate it when they do that. So essentially, right, that's where you find yourself today. That's where we are right now in terms of computing, console computing, home computing, all of the basics essentially. That's why you don't know why the bits didn't mean as much from PlayStation to N64 when N64 is 64-bit. That's why there's a very big jump from N64 to PS2, right, in terms of performance and capability, because that is in fact a 64-bit based centrally processed system running a 128-bit from a registry based off of some solutions that they found. So they really run it, and they can. It's adaptable compute that can be specialized towards either central processing or graphics considerations. And so that's what it uses its 64-bit central processor for. And it makes a clear difference from that to that, but now people think it's 128-bit central processor. It's not, and people didn't know it was that to begin with. So that confuses everybody even further from when Nintendo kind of fibbed and called it an N64 when it was just the graphics accelerator. It was 64-bit. So people are really seeing 64-bit processors in Sony products from PlayStation 2 all the way to PlayStation 5 today. But it's not that x86 64-bit standardization that Microsoft and Intel produced together and for pretty much all computing. That's the standard, right? Xbox delivers that in competition to the PlayStation when it arrives. So now Xbox is the first 64-bit x86 console system. PlayStation is going to run with its own solutions in its next advancement to the GameCube to compete with the PlayStation. It's going to stick with its 32-bit base system for central processing that is still used in the N64, actually. And then it's going to produce an even higher level of graphics acceleration in its Dolphin chip to compete with the higher pools of bandwidth for central processing that PlayStation 2 offers, right? And that that is offered in the Xbox and its more standardized x86 64-based system. Then is it that you start seeing, right, approaches away from quality standards from Microsoft and Xbox's end that was very well established in the Xbox's arrival in the second generation of 3D consoles at home. And so in the third one, you see that Xboxes fail, PlayStations run well, but they're more expensive. And that Nintendo sticks with its 32-bit central process system, even though that everybody's going to think it's 64-bit and on from that point because they marketed their N64 as a 64-bit centrally processed system. It isn't, but everybody's going to presume that the GameCube is a 64-bit system, and everybody's going to presume that the Wii is a 64-bit system and the Wii U thereafter, right? So it's really funny. And so they're still 32-bit, and they don't do anything too sufficient from the Dolphin. They don't upgrade it. It's all in the interfaces that they offer in the Wiimote and the Nunchuck and that point and shoot system stuff. Sony has developed further how it did its PlayStation 2, right? And now it has an even stronger pool of compute for its PlayStation 3 with its own proprietary integrated CPU graphics-based system. It runs off the same RAM compute. And Xbox, right, has continued on with its x86 64-bit processors that are more standard to the rest of personal home computing, like on this system. And so from that end point on, again, the Xbox kind of fails in quality and hardware on purpose for money purposes. Um, Nintendo markets it's really not too upgraded computes, very truck economized marketing style techniques to kind of net out Sony when they really produced an upgrade. But it's still a free market, right? And you can purchase the Sony system and get the Sony stuff, and it is higher end. But there's some complexities with the 360 where it's still a very solid machine. It just fails. So from that point, does it then head to the fourth generation of 3D home console computing for games, right? And you got the PlayStation 4, a continuation from what the PS2 started in its married systems, away from the x86 64 based PC processing that the Xboxes are using more on. The Xbox produces the Xbox One. The games are starting to be shite. And people don't care about what Microsoft is producing game-wise in comparison to what PlayStation, Sony is producing and what Nintendo is producing in the Wii U. The Wii U, again, is a 32-bit operating CPU, but they have even more graphics acceleration that they added on this time that wasn't added from the GameCube to the Wii. This time from the Wii to the Wii U, they have upgraded the graphics processing unit. And so now it is an obviously step up to 720p gaming, finally, for Nintendo. And that is to compete with 1080p capable gaming with PlayStation 4 from Sony. And 1080p gaming from Xbox One, but Xbox One has dropped off on how good its software is. So then from the fifth generation in, right, then do you have Sony moving to the PlayStation 5. Again, same fucking system, more compute integrated, their own system away from x86 64-based processors. New Xboxes use the x86 64-bit processors, still locked down. Games continue to be they're just not, they just don't grip like the PlayStation 5s do. So Microsoft now forays into cloud computing, and then its Xbox Game Pass PC system. They just want to go into PC computing. They want to do PC gaming. And then use the x86 64-bit processors and less lockdown systems, so not the worst there. But more cloud computing can be used to lock people down, so be aware of that. And then subscriptive services to access to cloud compute, it can also be used to lock people down also. So be aware of that. And they can be used to truck economize you. Please be aware of that. That's what Bill Gates warned of back when he was founding Microsoft and wanted to move away from systems like Netscape Navigator, by the way. They wanted the compute at home. So just remember that. And yet you don't have to distrust it. It really is cool stuff. The faster it is that we get the cloud compute to render through compute that we have at home too is the biggest. That's the link, right? That's the big one. And so from that basis, right, we know that was how Microsoft moves with it, and how PlayStation moves. They just add more compute, more basis, right, for their PS5, which is now a 4K capable machine from 1080p. So a huge resolution upgrade, truly. And they can do more things closer to ray tracing, but in probably like super specialized ambient occlusion effects that are like HBAO plus, more like it. Closer. And God rays and stuff, right? And then super high fidelity and texture packs for 4K. So there's all that. And then Nintendo has moved from the Switch, which was a 64-bit x86 lockdown system like the Xboxes have been, right? Using now married in right to the standard of personal computing capability, not locked down like Sony does it into their own proprietary standards. This one's the open source like one. Now Nintendo uses a process similar to Xbox. They use the x86 64-bit type processors with specialized NVIDIA graphics and central processing components in it. So they've switched over from separate to combined, but to the open source ecosystem standard, still locked down for their purposes. Okay? Sony, again, with the PlayStation 5, more compute, not to that open source ecosystem standard like the x86 64-bit operating systems that Nintendo uses with NVIDIA. They want to be even more separate than that, as like an extra. It's kind of like for stop pirating and stuff, right? And it helps them lock stuff down to their ecosystem software wise first. So that's how they roll it in comparison to Nintendo. And now Nintendo has the Switch 2, which is now a 4K capable device, right? Capable of up to 120 frames per second. Very cool. I don't know during 4K. I think it's up to 60 frames per second on 4K. Very cool either way. Probably using software, tessellation, help, right? But still really cool. And it's very small form factor, so that's what it does, right? And it uses that same basis of a more open ecosystem 64-bit x86 processor, right? But this time with more compute capability and better software standards against that, specialized towards it to create the 4K 60 frames and then the 1080p 120 frames per second system or speed. And so it's still on x86 64, unlike PlayStation 5, which is going to offer more base compute into their own system, and it's going to run more graphically capably like a personal computer, but it's not going to run on the same registry system and processors as your personal computer at home would, similarly to, like, say, the new Xbox or even like the Steam Deck, which runs essentially like a not lockdown Switch. It's like a not lockdown Switch with more compute than the Switch 1, probably a little bit less than Switch 2. So there's that. And so the Steam Deck uses the x86 64-bit based processing, central processing, right, to the standard of the open sourced ecosystem, and they don't lock themselves down to you. And the way they do that is, instead of going with Microsoft, right, as they do it as much as possible, they use Linux as a back-end operating system and not Microsoft Windows, which has a lockdown kernel. And that kernel is proprietary to Microsoft, right? And that lockdown kernel is like, think of it like an access key for what you can truly do to compute and operate in your system and your platform. That's what it is. It also helps them to secure your device, but, I only ever feel so secured myself, Microsoft. So on Linux, you can do more basis, right? More stuff, right? And it's completely unlocked for your purposes, even down to the software level to its compute, right? And so it uses that more open source 64-bit x86 style processing componentry with the not lockdown back-end software. And so it's going to be even less unlocked. It's going to be even more unlocked than a Windows computer in the end of the day. And a Windows computer is going to be a lot more unlocked than a Switch in the end of the day. But a Switch, in a way, is going to be a lot more unlocked than a PlayStation 5 in the end of the day. So in terms of true accessibility to everything, right, the most dense in terms of accessibility is Sony PlayStation, right? Then you drop down to the locked down, right, Nintendo basis, right? But also Xbox is going to be in the same category. Xbox and Nintendo both are going to be the next least accessible. They're going to be locked down to what you're allowed to do, really, even in terms of personal computing as a basis, right? But they're going to be specialized for games. And then you get down to the next level, right? And then also that it's to the basis that Microsoft and Sony will at least use the x86 64-bit, right, compute capability and potential. It's more standardized and open source through the system. And so then you break down to personal computing, right? Personal computing, and there's Microsoft personal computing, right? And that's the next least lockdown, right? And that's because it has a kernel that stops you from doing really absolutely everything. It might help you with security unless it doesn't. And then there's the next basis down, right? So this is truly the most accessible, the most open for your choice and how you want to do it. And that's going to be like the Steam Deck. And the Steam Deck runs on Linux. It uses the integrated NVIDIA graphics and central processing solution, but a lot of laptops do too. It's to the standard of the x86 64-bit based processing system, right? That's more open sourced, hardware wise, right? So you can do more stuff with it yourself, right? And you know how it works. But it works closer to like a laptop, and its integrated stuff would work to that standard. But it doesn't have Microsoft as a back-end operating system, which has a kernel which can lock you down from doing some stuff. It has an open kernel style system where you can do anything you want in it. So it is the most free, the most accessible. You can get things like EmuDeck on it. So now everything is seamless, and you can download every single game from your childhood that you ever wanted and play it on all the old school systems all the way back to 8-bit. And beyond. And so now we can do that with software emulation, right? On that Linux-based operating system. You can do it on Windows too, but it's just even easier on Linux ones. Less locked down, less secure in a way, so you might want to watch your butt a little bit more. But if Microsoft can't stop me, right, my QR codes, right, if it can't stop it so that I'm just trying to access my Yahoo code, my Yahoo account on my desktop, not remembering my password, using two-step verification, using QR, right, scan the QR code with your camera, press the button, and it's supposed to unlock me, and it doesn't let me. So now I'm like, alright, I don't fucking know. I don't fucking know anymore. So there's that with Microsoft. So I might recommend the Linux-based operating platform. I might recommend. And so now it's fully unlocked, and right, there's probably no ne'er-do-wells, right, at least to the central basis of how people might undermine your ability to operate your own systems, right? Now there's no central basis for people to do that. There might be folks trying to steal your information here and there and try and break into your system, but right, they might even be paid for via boiler room standards from those larger folks that want to lock you down to their kernels. But I want to let you know, the Valve is not one of these companies. And Valve produces a game standard console that has excellent standards for how it is that things perform to a standard of controls and right parse work. And then on top of that, they produce it on a Linux backend because they don't want people to be locked down. And so I want to offer that. Valve produces the most accessible, most streamlined gaming solutions that I've seen so far in both American and computing and computing the world over. And so that's just the way that is. So I wanted to explain this all. That more laptop style integrated graphics central process system that uses that 64-bit x86 space system, right, can use and run software emulation to create environments for calculations to be made more intricately and speedily, right, so that it spits out data relevant to enough to, right, the software that you are running, right, either the ROM or the ISO that you are playing, right, and so it makes that data more usable in how speedily it can calculate, right, running instructional sets in RAM to make these calculations more quick for it. And so that is how software emulation makes it. Essentially creates a software environment through the instruction sets that produces data that is essentially the same kind of way the data would have been spit out from the actual hardware of home computing consoles all the way back to 8-bit and beyond. And so now you can use a 64-bit data registered 64-bit centrally processed from a chip, right, x86 registry based system, right, to create that hardware environment in software through the non-lockdown Steam Deck, which has a back end of Linux, so you can really do everything you want and not be undermined as much by larger entities like Microsoft. And you can do all the way up, all the way past, up to 64-bit centrally processed based computing, and not even need the hardware for things like the PlayStation 2, which is a 64-bit centrally processed computer. Up to the PS3 for some games, a little bit, and up to some Xbox 360 games, also a little bit, because now you're using an x86 64-bit processor to emulate an x86 64-bit processor when you run, say, even an Xbox game. But now they might be able to find how it is that they can marry those standards and say, it's the same shit, isn't it? It is the same shit. That's why Xbox 360, right, should be very emulatable. I don't know if to say emulatable or emulable. They should be. And even Switch, right? Switch, I think, emulates excellently on the Steam Deck for that reason. Use a very similar NVIDIA graphics system and everything. Well, run Switch 2 on it. Well, oh no. And so that's where you're at. It's all about now, to the basis of as well as a Steam Deck can run stuff. It for actual, right, because it runs stuff as an actual up-to-date modern x86 64-bit centrally processed PC today. So it can play your high-end your high-end personal computer games that you'd download on Steam. So you can play high-end games that are specialized for it and then even optimized for it. You won't get all of the possible graphics features that you can get on a full ray tracing GTX, right, like 1080 card, right? I'm sorry, not 1080. I'm sorry, how about RTX like 4080, right? I don't know if they're in the 50s. Whatever. I'm over here back in Rasterland. Sorry. That is the end point where you're still using fully separate graphics processing, like in the old days, right? You're not using the more laptop integrated style systems like the Switch 2, and Steam Deck. You're using it more like the Xbox would have had it set up, but without the lockdowns against personal computing standards that the Xboxes would have. So now you might still be running a Microsoft operating system, right? But you're purchasing a separately specialized graphics engine, graphics computer, right? Graphics card. And then you're using a specialized central processing unit for 64-bit processing, right? To the highest standards today, right? And then it uses, right, the software that runs to the hardware of your computer is called DirectX. I think there's also Direct 3D. I forget the second one right now, but we're calling it DirectX for now. DirectX is an example of a standard, right, that enables a graphics processing unit, a separate one, to process well with the CPU. Right, for any graphics processing unit, for any CPU, as long as it follows that x86 64-bit processing standard that's in the open source and in the ecosystem for everybody to be able to pop into, right? And so, to the nature of this, right, you're able to marry any graphics card that you purchase that you want to upgrade for your own system. The consoles don't let you build this up. Even the Valve Steam Deck won't let you really upgrade your graphics system, right? They didn't make it modular for that. So when it gets more handheld and smaller, you really, unless they have this amazing modular concept, right, where you can click in a little square graphics card that gets better over time. They built it for that standard. Like, they have an excellent, like, fucking like 4K screen on the handheld, and it's not getting any better than that for ages, and it's OLED and all. Right now it's like, well, why would they want to pay for a new screen? Might as well make the graphics card the square that upgrades over time in terms of denser and denser compute capabilities with the software constructs that we make, right? Everything that we do with it. So that could even become a thing. It might be that your unit is like, all right, it's got the fucking nice ass screen, it's got the perfect controller, it's got every, right, it's super high end, and so no, I don't want to pay for all of that a second time. I would rather have slap in a modular graphics card upgrade. I would rather slap in a modular CPU upgrade to a motherboard that's been integrated from modular component replacement. So that's what I believe we'll be heading towards when it comes to computing in the best case scenario. But it could also get locked down there too. And I've suggested this over to PlayStation. I don't think they've moved on it, but I think everybody's mulling it over. And so that's an example. If you do that modular style motherboard system, right? Because now that I got you all caught up, right? We currently have rigs where you have to take an exposed polycarbonate board motherboard, right, that has standard slots called PCI slots in them, and that's what you slap your graphics specialized unit and card into, right, and then it has a spot in the center for a central processing unit, and so you put that into the motherboard, but it's all exposed in there, and it could be very cumbersome, all of it, right? And you have to open the fucking thing up, and then you have to follow the bootstrapping rules and all of that, right? Somebody might take you back towards a more lockdown approach, but it would be truly more streamlined and easier than that. You don't have to put the fucking thermal paste for your CPU upgrades. You don't have to fucking blow off the dust of everything and open up the fucking cage to replace the GPU. It's literally a button that you press on the back, it pops off, then you put a new one on. And so now that you don't even want them thinking about bootstrapping it, right? That's all going to happen automatically. And so now people can have modularly upgradable computers in home consoles or handhelds, right? And I know Valve might be thinking about it. Right? Valve is the shit. Valve is my excellent pizza pie. And I love Nintendo too, and Microsoft could always do better. Sony has been a true innovation company as well. And I spread love to all of them. I really do. They all helped make me. As well as Microsoft. But that was more on the personal computing end. Emulating made me, right? Playing games for free made me. Looking for the cheese, the internet made me, right? I made me, but they all helped. And so, you will see that I have made you if you've bothered to listen into this. And I'm going to make this available, obviously. This is a really good one. Alright? This is where we can go. We can stick to more cumbersome standards like how it is that we're parsing motherboards to CPUs and graphics processing units now, or we can start building true modular standards together in terms of how we can connect all these things externally and make it easier for every company that wants to build into this standard, which is going to be more open source. And I think it's a better mechanism. I think it's better to get computers less locked down over time for folks. I would like to see upgradable modular upgrades even up to mobile computing, not from terminal phones. Mobile computing, which is definitely what phones are capable of doing. And I can see Apple kick and scream as much as it fucking wants in regards to it. I am not allowing for any other narrative other than this to exist. I want custom standards. So I'm going to keep beating the drum for custom standards. I saw Elon Musk was pretty interested in adding custom standards for at least for software in terms of chat assistants that we will see in Apple iPhones, right? For example, and he just wants to pop into the most exposed, right, terminal access point for his products, right? He wants to make like a one-stop shop app for a lot of entertainment purposes and shopping needs, and it's kind of like similar like for Google and Google services and stuff. A lot similar to Facebook for a while, you remember? And so the idea is he wants his chat assistant. He wants Grok to be a potential, right, access point. Right? He wants to be able to access his Grok and his AI services through an Apple phone. And of course, it's always going to be self-interested. It's capitalism, right? But this serves my purposes as well. This serves my purposes as well. I want to help Apple get to more custom standards too. I really do. I think it's better for the American. I think it's better for everybody on the fucking planet. If I'm going to be honest, in seeing Apple's scope. And I do want people to be able to put in their own software and even have their own AI entities, of course, right theirs, on the most accessible devices. And naturally, it's like I'd hope to kind of coax Apple out of the feeling like it can't make money in a place that it seeks to lock down. But it's like I'm trying to get the ecosystem there, especially mobile phones, moving again. Right? Steve Jobs was really concerned about that, exactly that, a marketing lockdown that stops innovation in the computing industry and in the interfacing industry and everything, right? And I do see that Apple's like doing their cool foldy phone and everything, but I have been talking nonstop over standards that I really do think are completely common sense, routine moves that I would do to make computing more accessible on the phone and making organization standards more accessible on the phone. Apple has not offered me really one fucking bit on this. And so I'm with Elon on this. I would like to see Apple move to custom standards, including for the inclusion of his AI services, as well as open AIs and any customs. That's where I'm at on it. I do look forward to seeing what Siri is capable of too, right? I'm very curious to see what Apple concocts on its end of, right, chat assistants and AI agents. Absolutely, right? And these to me, I'm a big Mega Man Battle Network fan. These are PETs to me. These are personal terminals. They're portable, and they're going to carry our companions with us. For those of us that are into that. So, a huge fucking deal nonetheless. I wanted to get us all caught up on computing. I figured that game systems would have been the best place for everybody that had kind of a leg up to understand it to begin with in the first place. I think I've done a really fucking good job. So remember about open ecosystem like x86 64-bit based central processing systems. Central processed systems. Because that's the most open sourced ecosystem. And computers will use that. But then it's like some folks lock their way away from that proprietarily, like Sony. And so they'll have a whatever bit system they call the registry. And it'll really be specialized integrated compute that only works for their purposes. And then you'll see like Nintendo moving over to those systems, right? And Valve moving over to those systems. But right, Microsoft is already there and has been the predecessor of all of that, really, with Intel and other chip manufacturers like AMD, and Nvidia. But Nvidia is more like for DirectX and stuff. So and ATI and all, you get it. So essentially, right, you move into that circumstance. And that's a big difference. So it gets even more open when you get to personal computing and like what Valve has offered, which is a streamlined software called SteamOS that makes it look like it's streamlined in the accessibility of any console computer, any console game system. Just in terms of like you just access it all from a controller. It's really easy. And then you can go into what's known as PC mode and desktop mode, right? It's the full computing capabilities of the unit, right? So that's. Truly, theirs is like one of the best, but it's a laptop in comparison to this kind of computer here, which has a specialized graphics card system and a specialized CPU system that get married together via the motherboard physically, but through a software protocol called DirectX, an OpenGL, open guideline. So that's how that happens here for all of these different standards, these different manufactured products and solutions for graphics processing and central processing. And so that's really the beefiest, but then you can have that running on Linux. And so now we have something called Proton. And so Proton will take Windows-based executables. It'll take Windows operating, right, executables that would base to run on a Windows operating system on x86-64, and then it uses the fact that it's running on an x86-64 based system to essentially create a slight software emulation in the environment, so it runs more like an executable. Runs perfect executables, right? Runs Windows-based executables perfectly on Linux operating systems, as long as they're x86 64-bit centrally processed based. So that is now where we're coming in. And so that'll help keep Microsoft competitive. It'll help keep Apple competitive. It'll help keep all the game companies competitive. I just want everybody to know what the scale is, because on God, I need to do it. So I hope it is that we've all learned quite a bit today, right? And I hope it is that you know best how to adjudicate the capabilities of past, right, computers that we've owned in our homes since game consoles, but then also the best, right, those mechanisms that they used to separate you from the better knowledge of how compute really worked and what the bits were all about. Right, we got through the bit wars. It was really about central processing, but then Nintendo comes in and makes it it's not about central processing anymore. Apparently, it's about the specific graphics accelerator. And then after that, PlayStation steps up the game even further and says, "Hey, well, fine. It's not even about the processors itself anymore. It's just about the registries and how many places it has to call data from at a time." And this is both used to undermine people's base understandings of how it was all supposed to work in the first place. They don't see the rendering upgrades that they were expecting from 16-bit to 64-bit for if they only ever remain Nintendo. And if they were already on 32-bit from PlayStation, they went to N64 thereafter, then they're scratching their heads too, because they don't see the difference, really. And so nobody really knows, and it parses people away. And then now Sony goes to 128-bit, but people are never going to know the difference between a registry and a CPU that is actually used for central processing. So it's two steps away from truth at this point. And then you'll see still how upgrades and efficiencies were made in 32-bit computing through Nintendo and its graphics acceleration in the GameCube, and then, right, essentially, and then the Wii U. Still on 32-bit central processing, and then you'll see the advancements that Sony made for its proprietary integrated graphics and central processing solution with RAM that could be used for either or, but to their not x86 64-bit systems like Xbox was going to enter in with, which is really just a lockdown Pentium 3 Optiplex device with a very high-end graphics solution. So it had specified hardware for graphics, specified hardware for central processing. And it would have been married through something like DirectX. On a motherboard, that was right. It's just that it was locked down with a kernel for people to use it from central computing or personal computing purposes, right? And then they start lowering product quality on their end, even though they have that standard with the Xbox 360. PlayStation innovates further with more compute with their proprietary integrated system with GPU and CPU. And then Nintendo boosts up further. I mean, we just an interface upgrade, but then with the 4th generation, they do the Wii U. Finally getting the 720p gaming. Sony takes PS3 from 720p gaming up to 1080p gaming with the PlayStation 4. Xbox takes their 720p 360 gaming up to 1080 gaming with their Xbox One and beyond. Still the same deal. PlayStation, fully integrated. Right. Proprietary, not x86 64-bit. Their own registry system. Xbox One, x86 64-bit, locked down with the kernel. Right? Nintendo going with a laptop style integration system with x86 64-bit central processing. More software based graphical updates and upgrades. Not the strongest in terms of graphical prowess, but at least finally x64 they can get up to 720p up to 1080, but cutting it. They hit 900p on average. And then we get into 5th gen. Again, Sony boosts up even more compute. They're locked down, proprietary hardware system for GPU and CPU. Even more compute though, 4K up from 1080p to 4K gaming. Nintendo with their Switch from up to 1080p gaming. It's really still just higher end laptop graphic based 720p gaming and up. But then they switched that to the Switch 2, which is like a laptop-based graphics solution for true 4K gaming at 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second 1080p gaming, with software solutions there to help it along. Still on that x86 64-bit system, but it's like the Xbox, going to have a kernel that locks it down, right? You have essentially the same thing as the Switch, but with more compute. In the Steam Deck, it does not have the kernel to lock it down, and it has SteamOS to make it more like a proprietary gaming experience, like the Switch, at times when you want it to be like that. And then you have kind of the removal of Microsoft from consoles is taking it seriously. They're going into cloud gaming and Xbox Game Pass, so they're kind of diving back into PC gaming, where they built their x86 64-bit platforms for in the first place, in part. And then we obviously have our own built rigs, right? Sometimes you buy them from Dildo and they're pre-built, but it'll have a separate graphics unit, it'll have a separate CPU, it'll be married on a motherboard, and they'll talk through DirectX and OpenGL. And present it all itself to you through Windows, the operating system. It's the human interface system, the operating system. But it's not everything that's going on. And that's that, right? But you could put it even down. You'd have exactly what the computer I run and not take it off Microsoft and now have it running on a Linux operating system and use a software emulation standard named Proton to run Windows-based file executables, all the programs that you run on Windows, on Linux. And so now you're parsed and you have the freest system there. But I don't do that. I run on Windows here, just to get that all up. And then my hope for the future is a more streamlined modular system where you can take a nice flat square of a graphics processing unit upgrade, pop the old one out, and just click it in, and you don't even have to bootstrap it, and you can use that for handheld devices or even larger home consoles. You pop it out, and then and there it is. There's your GPU upgrade. There's your CPU upgrade. There's your RAM upgrade. That's what I would like to see, and I would like to see it standardized, that custom standard with specific connection types that are not proprietary but universal, based on x86 64-bit central processing compute standards. So that is what I want, right? But that's what I'm saying, and that's how I got my future sight. As it pertains to the mobiles, right? I'm with Elon. I would like to see software, custom standards, right, made available through Apple in terms of what chat systems I would like to see through it, other than Siri potentially. But frankly, I would just like to see a lot of different software-based customization standards. Frankly, Apple, I would just love to see that. Oh my God. And then we can change mobile computing to be more like desktop computing, the way it fucking should have been in the first place. All right. God bless everybody. We're heading on out. Let's see what oh yeah!